Hi, and welcome to our talk on speeding up your Drupal site loading time with Blackfire IO. It's a PHP profiling tool that we'll get into today. So about me and Dave, we were both from Evolving Web. Many of you have seen us before. We're up in Montreal, and we do lots of great Drupal work. Actually, our company had a 10-year anniversary informally like last week, so 10 years now, and doing Drupal for about 8 or 9 of those years. So about the speakers, done? Okay, so we've been doing this since 2007. We do a lot of work in clients in Canada and the USA. We've been going to Drupal cons and contributing to Drupal core and contrib for most of our existence, and we do lots of content migration, design, custom development, multilingual, and search. And as well, my wife Suzanne has a great training program that many of you are hopefully aware of. So today, and we've done lots of work for Government of Canada, Linux Foundation, here in New York for Lifetime and Canadian Television, and Travelocity and McGill as well. We're going to cover what is profiling in general terms. I came up with a zany acronym for how to do it. Then we're going to do a discussion of the tool that we'd like to show you today, Blackfire.io, and how to use it. And we'll also, in the last part of the talk, cover actual Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 case studies, where we went and, in the course of applying this tool, what are some common scenarios that we can pick up that you guys should look for to replicate and find the sort of low-hanging fruit. So my favorite section is motivation, usually. So if you're here, you're probably already motivated, but maybe you need some talking points to your technical management, why they should spend time and money making the site faster. So obviously, everyone knows about like bounce rate. So if a website is loading slowly when it's in a Google search result, people hit back right away, or like after a second for sure. Also, if you ever scale, the standard catchphrase in scalability, just throw more hardware at it. Hardware is cheap and engineers are expensive. Well, that's true, but managing a multi-cluster setup is not easy or cheap. So the longer you can go with simpler hardware, the better things are. So clearly there's a fine trade-off. So obviously user experience translates into conversions and translates into performance for e-commerce stuff. And I have an anecdote from Google's history. When you used Google back in the 90s, when it was like 1 or 2 years old, at the bottom of every page it says search results generated in this many milliseconds. And basically that was their QA tool. I mean, it was an engineering first culture, and every engineer wanted to see. They didn't have it like hide it unless you're logged in. They just wanted to know how long every page took. And many people don't know that Google's innovation, the famous PageRank algorithms, which measured backlinks, their main innovation wasn't coming up with the idea that we should look at what pages link to what other pages to determine importance. It was some sort of a probabilistic approximation to measuring PageRank using random crawls in a short amount of time. That was their innovation. That's what they published in papers about. So it was actually, originally, Google wasn't a new kind of search algorithm. It was a performance optimization that set them apart. So there's your innovation. So just a little bit of scope check here. I like scope checks as a development shop. We're not talking about all aspects of performance, and a good chunk of website performance is front end. In fact, it might even be 80% in most, but the pathological cases. So typically you have the backend performance. So Drupal runs, generates the HTML, all the dynamic parts of the page, serves that over the browser, and then the browser starts downloading all the related assets. So if you have a lot of ads, if you have like unoptimized images and just too much JavaScript and too much CSS, that'll take a while to load as well, and that could be most of your users' pain points. So that's a very important area, but we're not covering that today. A PHP profiling tool won't help you there much. So it's not going to capture the browsing rendering time, the network issues, the JavaScript, which is often blocking, and the asset fetching. So we are talking about PHP profiling, so it's kind of like saying, instead of the usual blue drop that Drupal is, this is like an X-ray that says, well, what's going on inside and where's the problem? So show me which part of the code is slow. So the key things that we're looking at in every profile is a time spent for every function that's called, and also the memory used by every function that's called, in any queries that are run into the database, any network and disk activity. And the way profiling tools typically work is that there's a PHP, what is it called, probe? But
it's a probe.
But it's a PHP module, right? It's a C code that hooks into the PHP interpreter and basically says, at the start of entering every function, tell me what function you're in and what time is it now. And then at the end of every function, when you leave that, tell me what it is now. And so it basically logs everything. It's called instrumentation. So it instruments every function call and then has this data that it passes to an external tool that then generates the pretty reports that you guys can see and analyze. So a reality check. We all love Drupal here. Drupal's the best. We should use Drupal for everything, right? But Drupal sites in real world tend to be heavy. I mean, especially if you have non-technical users who are trying to use it to do everything. They can get very far with configuration. And with configuration, you're pulling in a lot of other people's code. It's very easy to click, 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 and you're done. You don't have to write any code. But the end result can be a sluggish site, and it's important to track that, and then you can use this tool to see where along the way did my site builder make everything so slow.
Always blaming the site builder.
I like site builders. Yeah. Okay. So the other thing is Drupal core itself, even aside from contrib modules or any custom code that you might write, it's got pretty senior people who are pretty aware of performance issues. And most people who have contributed patches to Drupal core have probably run either Blackfire or XHProf or another profiler. But that doesn't mean they've done it at every commit or every step. So actually performance problems do run in. And so you might even find, although less, you'll find some low-hanging fruits that you can optimize in core. And definitely, this is core. Contrib is a whole different conversation. Chances are if you're using 50 contrib modules on your project, which I'm sure you are, 3 or 4 of them will have low-hanging fruits that they just like bugs. There's a lot more bugs in contrib modules. Well, there's a lot more unnecessary performance degradations. And another thing is people always say, well, it doesn't really matter about performance because I've got Varnish and I'll make everything load in 3 milliseconds, and then my CDN will distribute that in a short amount of time, and I don't care. But obviously, that doesn't capture scenarios like when you have users that are logged in, or if you have anything like e-commerce or any forms that set a cookie.
Search.
Yeah. So search are unique. So Varnish isn't very effective for search scenarios. And basically, like if you have anything e-commerce, the moment they add something to a cart, like a cookie is set, and then Varnish just says, "Oh, I'm not going to cache that at all." So then hopefully you were good about profiling your code, not installing too many modules, and keeping things lean, or not, and your site will go down if you have scale. And I mean, as developers, we often don't have Varnish, and I think we've all at least taken over somebody else's website that was slow, and it's just painful to work on it, right? So if you can spend a couple of hours at the start of taking over a legacy project and see why the hell is it so slow, and can I fix, a couple hours, a couple of days, doesn't matter, but can I fix this now? Not only all your users are going to be happier, but you're going to be a lot less miserable continuing to work on it.
Since Drupal, we're using a lot of contrib and module, so you don't have to control the module when you do profile. Let's say some module have performance issue. What do you do? Writing your custom module?
Yeah. So at our company, we kind of have a trade-off that we make every time we consider using a contrib module. We say, well, is it worth it compared to writing, say, 50 lines of custom code that'll do the same thing? So if you have to write 500 lines of custom code, and this module is 500 lines or 1,000 lines of code, then we'll probably use the contrib. If the
every module, we look at it and we check, what does the code quality of this look like? How many people are using it? Do we think it's going to be maintained well?
If you submit a patch against it, which we often do, will somebody come actually look at the patch, test it, and then merge it back in, or is it going to sit there for a year and a half? And the answer is it depends on the module. So there's no formula. You just sort of, by doing the same kind of projects for years and by being good at analyzing it, you can avoid the pitfalls and sometimes share your stories in presentations like that. But so there's no easy answer. It's you select the good ones and avoid the bad ones, and do custom code when you need to. I have a clicker. So this is my favorite slide. Check this out. Okay, this is a new toy. This is my favorite slide. It's kind of a summary of some of the case studies that we did in the last year or two. And when we discovered this tool, we went back and actually went through some of our projects to see if there's any low-hanging fruit. Because this tool is so much easier, more fun to use than the sort of the open source a tool called XHProf that Facebook released that everyone's been using for 10 years. That you have it, it's there, but you never really want to like use it unless you have to.
Configure, it doesn't work well.
Yeah, it's painful to use, so you never use it unless you really don't know what else to do. Whereas this one, there's like no excuse. It's just fun. So we did a project for McGill. I think 8 years ago. It was one of our first major Drupal projects, and then that was in Drupal 6. Then we upgraded to Drupal 7. And so it was a very minimal site. I mean, every page loaded in 250 milliseconds, and yet still just running through a profile, we right away we found on every page a 13% speed up. We'll cover that in a case study later on. For a client that we had a bit of a rocky relationship with because it was a difficult legacy project, we came in, tried to fix everything, fix some of it, but then they also said, no, we want to do more crazy stuff. I mean, at some point said, okay, well, if it's going to stay crazy, we can't really be involved.
That's the amount of time that we spent looking at performance.
Yeah, this is roughly like how much development time was required to find low-hanging fruit. This is to motivate you.
And fix them.
So this client, I mean, it was a lot more complicated. They were doing some really hairy stuff. We'll cover that also in a case study. But literally, after digging through their site for less than a day, we were able to take their homepage and cut the backend performance by 52%. And there was other improvements after a second day that we made that were similarly dramatic. For our own site in D8, corporate site, super static, how simple could it be? But apparently in Drupal 8 is a heavier beast than Drupal 7, and just on a static corporate site, we found a 20% improvement that would apply to many other sites of even basic static sites. We did an intranet portal, and on certain pages there was unnecessary complexity that we found right away. And most recently, we have, Dave.
Yeah, sure, I'll talk about this one. So we did a site for a graphic novel publisher, or we worked on a site for them, and they had an FAQ page that was...
Question. So KPI, I haven't using DA, so KPI is slower. So my question, should we wait, do it more optimized before we migrate?
No, I don't think that's the message. I think the point is, even in D8, there's still stuff to find. Even in D7, there's still stuff to find. But I wouldn't hold off on that account.
Yeah. So we did a site for a graphic novel publisher, and they had an FAQ page that took over 8 seconds to load. And this is a good example of the kind of thing that...
Sorry, we took over a super crafty legacy site for a graphics novel project.
Thank you. So this is a good example of some of the stuff that Blackfire can find, is that it doesn't just find mistakes in code, but it finds mistakes in configuration as well. In this case, it turns out the FAQ module is based on taxonomy terms, and you're supposed to configure it to only use like the vocabularies that are relevant to your FAQ. They didn't do that, they just left it using every single vocabulary on the site. So every time you view the FAQ page, you have to look at every single term on the entire site and load them all. And that took a long time. And once we just clicked a few checkboxes in the UI, we got a 92% improvement on that page.
Which if you realize 10% of 8 seconds is still not great for back-end loading time, but it's a start. So now onto the promised methodology. I came up with an acronym that'll help you remember this. It's MAFIA, because you're going to assassinate some performance bugs. I don't know. This is a new joke. Yeah. All right. So the first thing is M is for measure. So figure out what you care about measuring. This might be obvious, but getting in the mindset for this, it does take some effort.
You can't just say it's slow. You have to say what is slow.
Because people all the time come to us and say our site is slow, and we're like, what do you mean? Can you tell us steps to reproduce? And then you go to a random page and it seems okay, and they're like, yeah, it's slow. And we're like, is this the page? Like, no, not that page. So actually be specific about what you mean by slow, what your expectations are. Go to your competitors' websites, or go to sites that are of a similar nature and complexity that are well built, and say, well, look, these guys are doing lots of business and it's working well for them, and it seems to be loading in this many. The whole thing might take 3 seconds to load, including all the resources, and then the backend performance seems to take 500 to 600 milliseconds to load, and that seems to be okay. So you see, start browsing around to your sites that you usually go to and pay attention to how long things take. and then also keep in mind what URLs you're measuring, and whether there's cookies involved, whether there's caching involved, and also vary things up. Like sometimes if you're on a staging environment and it's slow, and bear in mind that there might be hardware differences between staging and production. Another thing that you don't even need a profiler yet, you could just disable some modules that you think are beasts. And then once you sort of got an intuition for what slow means, you can go into the profiler to figure out how that slowness is split along all the different functions that are called by the Drupal codebase, and which of them are the likely culprits. Next thing is analyze. So once you're looking at the profile, you're going to look for low-hanging fruit. I mean, obviously, the more hours you spend or days that you spend, you're going to notice all kinds of little things that you can fix. But we find that 80% of the time, there's some easy and obvious things to fix that take no effort. That's the ones we try to showcase on the graph. So look for those first. So basically, look for ones that are easy to fix, or look for major bottlenecks that are just choking everything off, and they're like, this is clearly the main problem. Like, I can optimize all the little things, but they will never add up to my 80% of the problem. So we find that typically there are like, maybe there's some code that generates and renders a whole menu on every page that could easily be cached, and so that's a typical low-hanging fruit. You might be able to save 3/4 of your rendering time. You might have SQL queries that don't do a proper join, but instead, there's like 50 queries instead of one with a one query that does everything. Like if you have a web request to some sort of an API that blocks everything, does it need to? Like, especially, can we move to a shutdown hook for reporting? And of course, there could be unnecessary node loads when you don't even need to get all that information. We also found that sometimes you don't see anything in the call profile, but the site is still clearly slow. And in our experience, it could be because of some server environment. For example, are you out of RAM, and is your hard drive being is your memory swapping? Are you in a dev environment on Vagrant and you're using VirtualBox shared folder? They'll make every site much slower, especially heavy ones, and other stuff. Next thing is fix. So once you make a change, you're going to get very confused very quickly unless you start recording what you did, what the original speed is, and kind of keep track of the commits. So that's challenging, and in general, you always should have a before and after. Like, look, I have this branch, it has these changes, and here's before I applied these changes, and here's what I applied after, so you can compare. Because a lot of the time, you can think you're making improvements, but you're really not. Yeah. Next is iterate, so don't stop. I mean, you find the first level of improvements, first low-hanging fruit, keep going, and probably do other improvements until it's fast enough, and it's up to you what is fast enough. And don't forget to log your stuff. I couldn't come up with A in Mafia, but applause. Thank you. If Suzanne was here, she would clap to make fun of me. All right, so that was the theoretic portion. Then going into a little bit more specifics. So we try to keep it simple. So for front-end stuff and holistic things, we use Chrome Developer Tools. Everyone in this room has used that, right? Like, we're web developers, so you can right-click, inspect. You have this lovely network tab. If you refresh, it shows you things. It shows you that the rendering of this page took 4 milliseconds.
That's not the rendering. That's the network fetch. But if you go to the timeline tab, then you see how long it takes to render.
I misspoke, yeah. So it gives you a nice timeline. So this tool is great for getting measurements of the whole. How long did the HTML backend rendering take? And sending that over. How long did it take to download all the linked assets and render those? And then you can start building a mental picture of what's going on. There are also command line tools for doing repeated, because there's a lot of variants. So you can do Apache Bench or AB. That'll say, with a concurrency of 10, run 100 requests on my site and give me the distribution of loading time. And for much more sophisticated stuff, you can write a whole XML-based script and using a tool like JMeter. There's also application performance monitoring tools that continually hook in to your site and look for deviations. So Blackfire is doing some of this. Another well-known one is New Relic. that a lot of, I think it comes with both Pantheon and Acquia.
Yeah.
And but it doesn't go at the same level of detail that a proper profiler will. So this is when you really want to be interactive and debugging, this is what you want to use. So that's XHProf is the Facebook open source one, and Blackfire is a more sort of recent, and much more robust tool. So how did I come across it? Every couple of years, whenever I had to like profile a site with XHProf, I'm like, oh man, have they gotten anything better yet? So I always just, every year I was Googling XHProf nicer user experience. And like a couple of years, like a year and a half ago, score, there was something, it was free, it works great. So this is how I discovered it. It's actually created by Sensio Labs, who are moving into the Drupal space. They've been sponsoring DrupalCons, and Fabien Portentier is the creator of this tool. And I think he wrote it in order to profile Symfony, which is the framework that he is writing.
Which Drupal uses now.
And which Drupal 8 has been sort of re-architected on top of. So he also created Twig. It's a freemium tool, so the basic core functionality that we'll be demoing is free, but once you start using it all the time in your team and you want to retain these profiles in their cloud tool, then they'll start charging you a reasonable thing. It's great because it has a much better UI. It also has great documentation for how to use it. It's much simpler to install and configure with your site. I mean, like if I was standing over your shoulder on your dev environment, we could do it in 5 minutes. You can log in with GitHub, like just all the fun things that you expect. And it has a much more robust JavaScript UI for exploring the call graph. It has supports for baseline comparison. So you say, before I started, here's my profile. After I made my changes, here's what it looks like.
It's like a diff.
Yeah, show me a diff of the profile. We'll show that. And unlike XHProf, which was open source by Facebook, and as far as I know, semi-abandoned, despite widespread support, this one is actually a commercial product that intends to stay alive. And just like New Relic, they're looking to sort of make it as part of your enterprise deployment toolchain, so they want it to be something that you can run continuously. Unlike XHProf, which you have to turn off all the time. That was to dive into the tool. I'll let Dave jump into the case study.
All right. So we worked on this project for McGill University. There was a calendar of all the courses and programs that exist at McGill. And so this was a project where caching was kind of important and performance was kind of important. Their UI was very search-based. Nobody shows up and digs through a giant hierarchy of programs and sub-programs and sub-sub-programs to find the course that they're interested in. People just search for it. And every time you search, you get a brand new page, which is almost certainly uncached. So the uncached performance of the site had to be very good, and performance was very important. So we're going to show a page, and we're going to show how to profile it. So I'm going to open this page.
No, and this is a site that we built, like I said, 8 years ago. I think
don't look at the theme, just like...
This is still the standard McGill theme.
Okay, so we have the site. On the server where the site is running, we've installed Blackfire, and we've installed Blackfire's little Chrome extension here that lets us run a profile. So all I have to do is open this up and hit profile, and hopefully it works. So you see it's doing a bunch of different steps here. It's not every single 10% that little progress bar goes up, it's doing another hit on the page. It does 10 hits in total, and that makes sure to average out the result. So if something was weird in one result, if the server was swapping or something, you're not going to get very unusual results in the profile report. It makes sure to smooth everything out and be...
Did it go to different regions?
I don't think they go to different regions, no. That would be pretty cool, though. You should suggest it. So now we get some results. And this is just the basic results in a toolbar. You can see the page took 244 milliseconds to load. Cool. But if we hit View Profile...
Sorry, and 244 is very...
That's actually quite good.
Very quick. I mean, I think a Drupal 7 clean site with no content on it will probably take longer than that if it's uncached. So this is Drupal 6, and it's got no contrib modules. It was all custom code. Oh, you're right. This is 7.
This is 7.
Originally it was 6.
Yeah.
But it's very minimalistic, so it's pretty good.
So here's the profile page, and it looks really complicated. So I'm going to explain a bunch of the different parts of it. See if this works. Cool. So up there, that's the actual time it took. That's pretty simple. And it explains it over there. Next to it is the network time. So that includes time that was spent sending the site up and down on your connection. There's the memory. Sorry, that's not the memory. What is that? I don't even remember. CPU, right. So you can have some time that's waiting, and so the CPU time and the I/O time should generally sum to the total time. You've got your memory over here. You've got, I believe that's data. No, this is database. Network, bytes sent. Oh yeah, because if you do web requests, it will report the network time spent, and it will record the number of web requests that you've made. This doesn't do any web requests, so that's fine. And it reports the database queries. And this is 31 milliseconds of database queries, which is quite good for a Drupal site. We also have this whole section here, and this is one of the really important sections. This shows every function on your site, how many times it was called, and how much time it took. Both the inclusive time, which is how much time was taken by that function and everything it called, and the exclusive time, which is how much time that's inclusive and exclusive.
Maybe it'll be easier to see if you zoom in on the
Yeah.
top of the graph.
We'll see in a sec. And it's nice because it's sortable, so you can see like what was called the most times. So it was Drupal static. And then this section here is the call graph. So this shows, it's like a tree, well, an directed acyclic graph if you want to be picky, of every single function in your program and what it calls and how much time it took. So if I zoom in, I can see the program started with main, which is pretty normal, and main takes 100% of the time. And main calls index.php, and that takes 99.65% of the time, and so on and so forth. Every time I click on one, I get a detailed presentation of that particular function over here, and I can even click on the different things that it calls. So here I can see that menu execute active handler calls 2 functions, and if I click on this one, it says Drupal deliver page is the biggest one. Each little bar here is sized by the amount of time it took relative to the other bars. So I can zoom in here and look for what took the most time. The things that took a lot of time are in red or pink, so I'll try to follow those.
Zoom in some more, Dave.
Zoom in more? Okay. So here I can see that theme, for example, took 30% of the time, which is not crazy. A lot of Drupal pages have a theme function that long. But as I follow this down, I can see that a single form took 10% of the time, and that's too much. A single form on your site should not take 10% of the time to render, of the entire time to generate that page. And so if I keep following this down, eventually I find this function called load academic faculty nodes, which take up over 8% of the site loading time, which is just 20 milliseconds, which is not that much, but it's enough that it shouldn't be there. And you can see a called node load and a called node load 36 times. That's a lot of node loads. You shouldn't have that. And so now this has identified one of the problems with our site. Now that we know where to look, we know to look at this load academic faculty nodes function, we can look at the actual function. And we can see that indeed it's calling node load in a loop. It's iterating over a list of faculties, and for each faculty it's finding a node ID and it's loading it. And this is really slow. Every time you load a node in Drupal, it has to go and find all the fields and all these different field tables and load each of them from the different tables, and it takes quite a while. It's much more efficient in Drupal to use node load multiple, which is in Drupal 7 and up. This site was a Drupal 6 site, so it didn't use it. But node load multiple will load all the fields from different nodes all at once. It can load if there's a single field, like the body field, it'll load the body for all the nodes at once, and then load the title for all the nodes at once.
So can anyone guess why? It was me. I put that in there. Can anyone guess why that's the case?
Because it's D6 code original?
Yeah, because our algorithm for upgrading from D6 to D7 was make all the errors go away. And we weren't using Blackfire and our criteria for errors. We were just making the white screen of death go away. And so nothing ever complained about pages taking unreasonably long.
So this was a pretty easy fix. We could just iterate over the faculties, collect the node IDs, and then load them all at once with node load multiple. And once we did this, it got a lot faster. And we saved, I guess there was 20-something milliseconds every time. Here, on the environment I was testing on, it was 25 milliseconds each time. So that's not the best fix. 25 milliseconds is not going to make anybody leave your site, probably. But considering there was just an hour of work, and with another hour we could probably find more similar things, I think this was probably worthwhile. If we found 5 issues like that would be 125 milliseconds, which would have doubled the time this page took to render. So it's pretty important. Alex, do you want to continue?
Yeah. So we always run out of time, so we kind of cut this. But here's a screenshot from the very nice Blackfire install docs. that tell you how on a Mac dev environment to install. So you have to have an agent, which is like some sort of a daemon that runs and listens to the probe. You install the probe, which is a PHP extension, and you install the Chrome extension as well.
But the point of this is you go to one page and they give you about 5 or 6 commands to copy paste, and then you have Blackfire installed. You don't have to set up any crazy server stuff.
Yeah, and they have like a tab OS X, Linux, Ubuntu, Windows. They have packages that they maintain for common Linux distributions. This is supposed to, one of their main value adds is they make it easy and hassle-free. Also, you log in with your GitHub stuff, and then they just give you your tokens that they generate for you. So please don't let the hassle of installing and dissuade you from trying. So other features, like we mentioned already, the comparison to a baseline profile. They support common use cases that are kind of a little out of the ordinary, but quite ordinary. So when you have an AJAX form that submits something, how are you going to actually track what's slow about processing that form? I mean, that's very important scenario for Drupal.
And so the reason this is important is because if you just use the Chrome extension to say profile this page, it's not going to submit the form every single time. It's just going to refresh. It's just going to refresh. And so if you want to profile something that involves dynamic behavior like that, you can.
But the point being is they've got that all figured out, and it's pretty much as seamless. And we'll demo this in a sec. We also realized that they also realized that drush commands are, like, especially for migrations, are quite important. And so they have a Blackfire client, a command line tool that has a few commands you can run, including Blackfire run, and then a PHP script, and it'll run it for you, but it'll instrument it. So it's kind of in lieu of that extension, it'll set the right environment variables to trigger the instrumentation, submit it to the agent, who will submit it to the web service.
Point is, you can profile drush.
Yeah, and as simple as this line. In case you're wondering why this isn't drush, but drush.launcher, because drush.launcher is a PHP script and drush is a shell script. And so Blackfire run needs a PHP script, and the shell script only just calls drush.launcher. And then the cool thing is that because all of these profiles are being uploaded to the web service, which have, for a short amount of retention, they're free to store there, you can share them with your team in Slack, for example. Hey, look at this thing, tell me why your code is at fault. So.
And with the world at large, if you want to brag to your friends how much time you saved using Blackfire.
Yeah. We have another mini case study for Client X. So their homepage was pretty bad. On our Docker system, it was 357. Well, no, it was quite slow. It was their homepage. It was supposed to be cached. It's for a major government organization. I'm not going to go any more than that. But it was supposed to load quickly. It was supposed to have millions of hits a year. Why the hell was it taking like a second and a half or a second? And we open our trusty Chrome Inspector tab, the network tab rather, and here's what we see. You go to the homepage, which when it was in my Docker environment, it's Docker, but otherwise it would be the domain. It gives a 302, and it takes 357 milliseconds to generate a redirect. And then it redirects to /en. There must be some kind of a language detection there, right? So it goes to English, and then that takes 300 milliseconds to render. So you see that the redirect, which probably does like 10 lines of language detection based on your browser header, is taking longer than the actual page. So how do we debug a redirect? What the hell's going on? Why is it so slow? So in the same Chrome Inspector tool, if you right-click on that thing, Chrome gives you the option to copy as curl. And you can then paste that into your terminal, curl, like it'll give you curl and everything here. So all you have to do is paste that in and then prepend Blackfire to it, and then this Blackfire command line client will instrument that request, including all the cookies, and including any headers, and including any post data that it might have. In this case, there is no post data, but this will track the redirect. And so this kind of sidesteps that Blackfire extension to measure just the request you're asking it to, that redirect, that leads to your redirect. And so the command line tool runs the same little 10 times, and it gives you a URL to visit to see what's going on. And in this case, it took 422 milliseconds, of which, that's how it breaks down. So once we looked at the profile, and we were going to, for time reasons, we'll skip that, we saw that the main bulk of the action seems to be in this function, tq home preprocess page. And then it does some helper function to detect language from a browser, and then a Drupal goto for a redirect. Can anyone who's seen this kind of stuff before guess why this is dreadfully inefficient?
No caching?
You don't even need caching for this. Are you reading Are you reading the bottom bullet? We're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. So this isn't a preprocessed page. This means it renders the whole page and then kicks off the whole theme system. Starts rendering all the blocks. Why the hell are we rendering all the blocks and the main content of a page if all we're going to do is redirect and short circuit? We're not going to display the home page. We're going to just exit. So it's incredibly wasteful. You move it to a hook in it and you save all of that. So after that, we went from 350 milliseconds to 74. There's a lot more caching and other optimizations you can do, but with one tiny change in code and looking at this profile, you can very easily see where the trouble is. Sorry?
Not us.
It doesn't say EW here. It says whoever this is, so we'll just leave it undefined. Yeah, and actually we implemented a lot more dramatic performances having to do with caching the mega menu right after that, but this was the most low-hanging fruit. So we've got, aside from this, we've got a few miscellaneous tips. They've already mentioned that what it does is it does 10 requests and it gives you an average time in each one. So you might be wondering, how the hell was this function called 2.5 times? Well, it's because on average it was called 2.5 times. One of the things it was cached and it didn't get called. But you need to keep that in mind because sometimes what it does is the first time it's uncached and then the next 9 times they're going to be cached, right? So it kind of reduces the effect of caches. But sometimes you need to profile the uncached behavior and you know what the caches are. So you basically, the first step will be to disable aggregation, clear all your caches, and then get a profile from once. It'll be more random, but at least you can see what's there. The other gotcha to keep in mind is that just like XHProf, it doesn't keep function arguments. So when the function theme is called
In Drupal 7.
Yeah, I don't have any.
Don't go there.
The first argument to theme is the name of your theme hook, and in fact, all theme does is it routes it to the right theme implementation, like which template is this, or which theme function should this call. And as far as Blackfire is concerned, all calls to theme are like the same function, and they're going to be plopped together. I mean, their children are still going to be tracked, so it's not all missing, but it
makes it hard sometimes to figure out what's going on. You're looking at a profile and just everything is calling theme from all different places.
Yeah, and with advanced Blackfire configuration, you can actually say, hey, I want this function, I want its first argument to stay separate. And then it'll actually draw you separate call graph elements for each argument.
Disable caching on your notebook?
Well, in Drupal 8, it's pretty hard to disable all caching because you need your container to be cached, otherwise the site will be incredibly slow. Like it'll take 5 seconds for each page to load. Without the entity cache, it's going to be very hard to develop. So you can't really disable all caches. What you can do, you can try to disable some caches, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Great. So we use Blackfire in conjunction with Xdebug, which is another PHP module and a set of tools that allow you to step through your code and inspect what the value of each variable is and what calls what. So this is kind of once you look at the graph and figure out what you want to profile, what you want to debug, you can start debugging there and say, why am I even calling this function so many times? But keep in mind, if you do this, you have to enable and disable the PHP module all the time because it's going to really skew your profile.
Basically, Xdebug interferes with Blackfire, so you want to use one of them at a time, not both.
Yeah, and I think in the future they're thinking of how do we automatically disable it, when you run your profiles, but that hasn't been done yet. We found that there is substantial profiling overhead. David, did you say 50%?
Up to 50%.
But at least it's consistent enough that, this is when you enable the profile, not when you have the passive mode where nothing's happening. But we found it consistent enough that it's not so random that you can't interpret the results. It's just that the numbers won't be the same when you're looking at them in the Blackfire profiles for total wall time versus when you're just looking at it in your browser's network tab.
They're just all scaled up by 50%, but they're still accurate.
Yeah, and in computer science, there's a fundamental trade-off. When you study your data structures and algorithms course, it's like there's a fundamental trade-off between speed and memory usage. I mean, you can always cache more things, assuming you have unlimited RAM to store all the results from. You can make everything almost a cache hit if you never clear your caches. But Drupal's already kind of large when it comes to memory usage. So don't go around profiling and starting adding caches to everything, because then might make your dev site faster, but then in prod it just won't allow you.
Cache things that are worth it,
Yeah.
not things that aren't.
And one thing we found is that there's this thing called Blackfire SDK. Sorry about that. There's a software development toolkit.
Yeah.
And it's a PHP library that you can include inside, say, your Drupal
It's
custom
actually
module.
automatic. When you have Blackfire, you automatically have this SDK.
Oh, it pulls it in by default.
Yeah, and you can basically say at any moment, I want to stop profiling or start profiling inside your PHP code.
Instead of the extension.
I think you still have to use the extension.
Okay.
But it just says so let's say there's part of your program that's really complex and this call's going all over the place and you just don't want to deal with it in your profile. And you're pretty sure it's not the problem. So you could just use this to exclude that part and only look at the part that's interesting.
Yeah, so in the really hairy scenarios, we're like, we don't know what's going on, but we know the problem's here. Like, I want to do a subset of my call graph to be profiled and instrumented. Like, there's just too much stuff going on. The SDK functions enable probe, you just call that. I think no arguments, right?
No, it's a little complicated to get it.
But it's in the docs. Yeah, so just call enable probe, then call disable probe, and then you'll have a subset of the graph to look at.
Isn't that code you write disabled?
In your PHP code.
Yeah.
Like, say you're profiling a block of custom code, you can implement hook init and hook boot.
All right, so I'm going to talk about another case study, and this is what we did on our in D8, which makes it a little more exciting, and on our own corporate site, which, as Alex mentioned, is basically a brochure site. There's not that much super interesting there, but it still had some slowness. So we upgraded our site to Drupal 8 really early, and it gives us a lot of things that we really like. We love all the features that come with Drupal 8. Unfortunately, Drupal 8 is kind of slow, and that makes us sad. So on most sites, it shouldn't matter that much, but it definitely has an impact. Specifically, every single time you edit a node and save it, it invalidates a bunch of caches. And if you're editing nodes a lot, that means that a bunch of users are going to see the uncached behavior, and they'll see slow pages.
By the way, sorry to interrupt. Drupal 8 is slower than D7, it's true, but D7 is slower than D6, it's slower than D5, and the computers that are hosting D8 are probably faster than the ones that were 4 years ago that were blah, 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 blah. So I don't think, politically, we're not saying hold off on upgrading because it's slower. It's just fact of life.
And D8 has much better caching. So that's one nice thing. A lot of caching is built in, and this blog page is very fast when it's cached. But anytime I edit a node, a bunch of caches get invalidated, and the page becomes slow again. I think it was something like 500 milliseconds, which is a lot for a pretty simple page. So one problem that we hit is, as Alex mentioned before, Blackfire does aggregation. It makes 10 requests, and it averages them all out. And so when we want to test uncached behavior, we have to define what do we mean by uncached behavior. We can't just say, like, we're going to turn off all the caches, because that's not what users see. Users never visit the site with nothing cached. So what we can do instead of turning off all caching is we can simulate the exact situation that we're interested in. We're interested in the situation where I edit a node, and then somebody visits the site and the page is slow. So we can just add this thing. In Drupal 8, they have event subscribers, which get notified every time certain things happen. They're kind of like hooks in D7. And one hook that exists is this one, kernel events request, and that gets called basically right away when a request happens. So on our development site, not on our prod site, we can add this listener for the kernel events request hook, and we call it kill blog cache, and all it does is it goes and it says, get me a random node and invalidate it. It basically exactly what would happen if I went and edited it and hit save.
Note that this is using Drupal 8's new services, and one of the services that has is cache tags. So this basically tells it to find all the caches that are related to node list, node 239. And
say they're no good anymore. So this simulates exactly what we want, and that makes it really easy. We can continue to use aggregation, and we also don't have to disable all caches on the site. So once we do that, we get a big profile, which I'm not going to show you now, but one interesting part of it is this. This is part of core Drupal in the block module, and it's Drupal block repository get visible blocks for region. And it's taking a lot of time. It's taking over 100 milliseconds. This is really important. This is part of core, and this is the part that decides when I view this page, which blocks are visible on that page. It's pretty normal in Drupal 8 to make a lot of things blocks. Just like before, you had views blocks, but you can also have all kinds of custom blocks in D8, and there's lots of other software that just creates things that are available for blocks. You can have custom blocks. And so our site had, I think, 130 blocks at the point that we were looking at this. That's a lot, but it still shouldn't take this long.
So I'm not exactly sure because we didn't touch this part, but I think in Drupal 8 it's like the title, like the page title.
Yeah,
is now
even the
a block.
title's a block.
So it's not just a theme variable that you place in the right spot in the template. You actually it's exposed to the block system. So a lot more things than before are now blocks. And so
That's right.
it turns out if there's a performance problem related to blocks, there's a lot more blocks that are going to be there to hamper it.
And you can't even get around this with advanced caching techniques. Like people talk about Big Pipe, the technology that goes and like figures out what should be on the page, and then sends you the page with all the cached parts, and then starts sending you the uncached parts. But the first thing it has to do, that's like a great improvement, but the first thing it has to do is figure out what's on the page, and that's this function. So this happens even before Big Pipe can start kicking in. So it's quite important. So when we analyze it and we see why it's slow, we find that it's this function, get visible blocks for region, that's being slow. It's iterating over every block in Drupal's block storage for the current theme. So it's finding every single block and it's loading every block. And then for each one it checks, should I be viewing this on this page? Do I have access to view this?
Does the current user?
Yeah, the current user / request. It's a little complicated with blocks. But should I be viewing this on the current page? And if so, then it shows it. And so this is an incredible amount of work just to figure out if blocks are visible. We're loading every single thing. And it's pretty inefficient.
And this is Drupal 8 core.
Yeah, this is in core. And so this is kind of familiar because there's a system in even Drupal 7 that does similar things. When you want to look at a list of nodes, like in a view, you don't call the access hook on each node. You don't just check, can I view this node? Can I view that node? Can I view this node? Over and over again. That would be really slow. Instead, Drupal is a system that it calls node access that says, build me a query that figures out which nodes I can see. And it just runs one database query, and right away it knows, oh, these are the ones I can see. That's cool, this works. And so we could do a similar thing with blocks. There's no reason that wouldn't work. Instead of loading each one and checking it, we could just build a query that checks them all at the same time. And so we did that. We built this module called Block Access Records. It's open source, it's on GitHub, and it just runs a single query. It does some complicated stuff to build that query, but as a user, you don't have to look at it. And it just replaces all that logic with this one query. And so this time it saves 80 milliseconds on every uncached request on the entire site. And it would have similar effects on any other Drupal 8 site with that many blocks. We're hoping one day we can get something like this into core, because that would be great. It's not reasonable that core should take this long to do this. But for now, you can try out the module and see if it works for you. So now that you've seen some of what Blackfire can do, we're going to talk about how it's not just a free tool, but it also has some premium features, which are interesting. So they have a profiler plan, which is quite cheap. It's, I think, $10, $15 a month. And it gives you data retention, so you can keep your profiles forever. But then, interestingly, it gives you this feature called recommendations. And so what recommendations will do is it'll say, let's say you're using a Symfony site. Blackfire will detect that it's a Symfony site and look for some common problems that Symfony sites have. And so we help them build some Drupal integration. So it can detect if you're using a Drupal site, and if you are, it'll build in some recommendations to check for certain things in Drupal sites. So for example, we were looking at a site recently that was a Drupal 8 site that we built, and it seemed a little slower than it should be, and a normal Blackfire profile wasn't showing much of interest. So if I open this up, is it going to load? Yeah. So if I look at the profile here, it's really hard to see, but everything that's happening is pretty normal. Rendering takes a long time. It's normal for rendering to take a long time. Once you get some experience with Blackfire, you start to learn what takes a long time. Get visible blocks for region is taking a long time, which is the thing we just talked about.
But we didn't apply our
module to this. And a bunch of other things are taking a while, like building the page is taking a while. Those are all normal. So looking at the call graph doesn't teach us much, but looking at the recommendations, it gives us a bunch of recommendations, many of which are Drupal specific, that it discovered about our site. So it discovered that we're not using APCU, which is a very important module to keep, to basically store a bunch of data in memory instead of storing it in the database. It discovered that we're not using the page cache, which is normal because this was in development, but still, it would be nice to do if you're not in development. We're not using CSS and JavaScript aggregation, which don't hurt backend performance too much, but they hurt front-end performance. We're not using the Twig C extension, and that makes a big difference, rendering Twig templates. So there's all these suggestions that it gives us, and for each of them, it gives us more information. So it'll tell us, for example, how to install the Twig C extension. And so by following these recommendations that we wrote ourselves, we were able to make the site faster by about 34%, which is a pretty significant bit. And this is why Blackfire has sort of become part of our site deployment workflow now. Every time we deploy a site, we try to look at it and say, run it through Blackfire and see if it gives us any recommendations. Has it caught anything that we should have fixed and we never thought of? And that's really useful in making sure that we don't do something wrong.
Yeah. And so the recommendations. Since we gave this talk, the Blackfire folks approached us, and they gave us some, like they said, let's do a partnership where we'll give you some free hosting and you'll do some free work for us. So free enterprise level stuff. So in exchange, we wrote the Drupal checklist and the docs that you guys see.
And one thing about this is that it only works for Drupal 8 at the current moment, because that's what you all should be using anyway. No? So they do have a higher level of plans, the premium plans, and this comes with some other interesting features. There's environments which let you share your profiles amongst the team but make them private to anybody else, so other people can't see them. They allow you to do custom metrics. So if you look at all these recommendations, we built metrics into Blackfire, which are like specifications for kinds of things that can happen. They have a custom domain-specific language for this. So we built metrics that enabled all these recommendations. But you can build your own metrics and your own assertions, which are like recommendations, but custom ones that use those. So right now we don't have one here, but you can build your own if you're using one of these premium plans.
Recommendation that they take from the Drupal backpocket recommendation.
What? I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
The recommendation that see that they're taking from the Drupal backpocket recommendation that cut and paste put into the text.
Oh no, that wasn't cut. We wrote that. Those are.
You wrote
yeah, we wrote.
Dave wrote it.
Okay, I wrote that. So if there's complaints, send them to Alex.
We hosting Aquia, they have something called Insight.
Mm-hmm.
That you go to your code and it give you the link.
Yeah, and I know Pantheon is something similar, but these ones you can get through Blackfire, and they're different ones.
Yeah, Pantheon just runs the site audit module, which gives you a checklist of like basic performance things, basic security things. It's very useful. You can also just download that module and run that checklist yourself. But this is well beyond those basic recommendations. I haven't used Aquia. It's probably something similar.
Yeah. So this one can check things like, for example, remember we had that case study where we had too many node loads. Blackfire will actually detect situations like that and tell you, hey, you're loading too many entities. Maybe you've got something going on there. And I don't think any of the other tools will do that at this moment.
Yeah.
And so we talked about custom metrics, that you can build your own recommendations and your own measures. And once you do that, you can actually basically do continuous integration with Blackfire. You can have it say, every time I do a commit, Blackfire is going to check my site and make sure that none of my metrics are failing. So you can have a metric that says performance on this page shouldn't go down by 10%. And then Blackfire will actually check that for you on every commit. We haven't used too much of it, but it's definitely interesting and something you should check out. And finally, with their very high-end plans, you can actually run Blackfire server on-premise.
So on the CIP, if I have Jenkins running my...
No, it's not. They'll run it in Blackfire, but you could have it triggered the same way that Jenkins is triggered. So you have two sources of information. And yeah, so if you have very private data, if you're like working at a hospital or something, you can pay Blackfire a lot of money and they'll let you run it on premises, so you can still check your performance.
And a lot is a couple hundred, I think. It's not so much.
For the on-premises version, I'm not sure. I think that was more. So finally, some things you can do. Did you want to cover those? Yeah. So you can follow us on Twitter. You can check out that block access records module. I'd really like it if more people used it and let me know how it worked for them. And specifically, there's a core issue that's related to it. I think I've linked to it in that repository. It would be great if more people would comment and say, hey, this is something we really want, or alternatively, we think there's a better way to do this, and here's what it is.
But basically, you will get a 100 millisecond
improvement on
your Drupal
every
site.
uncached page on your site. So that's nice. We've written some blog posts about how we've used Blackfire, so if you want to read about this later and you can't see the talk for some reason. And we also gave a talk a while ago, but we're still giving it now. We gave it today about how we upgraded to Drupal 8, and we think that would be interesting for people, and if you're looking to get on Drupal 8, you should check that out. As Alex mentioned, we do a lot of training at Evolving Web, and we encourage you to come to our trainings or send other people to our trainings. And finally, there's a book that Blackfire released that introduces you to Blackfire. It tells you all about how to use it, all its different features, and just gives you a really good, straightforward introduction to it. I don't think we would have become as interested in Blackfire if we hadn't had this book. And one thing that's nice is they'll give it out to pretty much anybody who asks. So if you go to...
We'll give it out to pretty much. So they sent us a bunch of copies, and
that's true.
as part of the partnership. So with the expectation that we can hand it out to people in the Drupal space. So
if you
put
go to
up,
that URL,
yeah,
you can just sign up to get a Blackfire book, and
we'll mail it to you.
Yeah, and read it, and we hope you like it.
Yeah, and this book was actually the inspiration for this talk because it was just so well written. It explained the tool so well, but it also explained the methodology so well. I only probably butchered it more than it did justice for it with my Mafia synthesis. But butchered. But really, it's really a book about profiling in general. He's got a lot of very specific examples from his Symfony knowledge and just basic PHP apps. What kind of low-hanging fruit to look for. And there's a lot of great philosophy, and it's really well written.
And really, it's written by Fabien Potency. He's like the expert on all these things. You really can trust what he has to say.
As opposed to Dave's recommendations, which take that with a grain of salt. Just kidding.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We hope you got something out of this.
Great. We have
Let's leave that up for a sec. So
and you have a week. You have a week to fill out this 3-question form that says your name, address, and email address. Any questions?
Couple minutes for questions.
Just a few minutes.
Are you going to put the slides up?
They are already up. If you go to, not this URL, if you go to a certain URL, which is Dergachev oh wait, no, it's the github.io. Okay, there is a URL, we will put them up.
Are you going to put a link on the session description page on the camp?
Yes, we will.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Did you find any other code or functionality in code, like block access?
Did we find?
You found that block access is getting called for each loop, and it is called 407 times.
Yeah.
Is there any other functionality you found?
Oh, in core, that's troublesome. The other things in core that were potentially problematic were much smaller. I don't think any of them seem to be worth fixing. You often have to say, this is a problem. It's taking 10 milliseconds on every site load, on every page load.
We can get it down to 4, maybe.
Right. If we work really hard and put in a few days of work, we can cut 5 milliseconds from the page load time. Is that worth it?
This was a really good talk, by the way.
Thank you.
I used this recently to diagnose a really bad core performance issue.
Oh, yeah? Which one?
So it's related to multiple value fields and views. So basically, I had an event with recurring dates, and recurring dates for Drupal 8 is not really there yet. So in the meantime, I'm just using a multi-value date range.
Oh, okay.
So imagine you have one event with 100 repeating dates on it.
Yeah.
And you have a view that's displaying each day, right?
Oh, my.
So that's a common scenario for calendaring app. But just displaying that one node for the 100 dates in the view took 20 seconds.
Whoa.
With render caching disabled. So imagine you just cleared the cache.
Okay, with render caching disabled.
Right.
But still.
So you just clear the page cache or something, someone hits that page, it takes 20 seconds.
Yeah, that's really surprising.
But reload the page, it's real quick.
Okay.
Render caching kicked in. But even so, it shouldn't take 20 seconds even with render caching hold. So I used Blackfire. I tried XHProf initially. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to visualize, right? So this was really helpful, and I found a bunch of issues with the way that Views is handling fields, rendering individual field data like that, and an issue with the date-time field formatter. So I created a core issue for it, and I posted screenshots of the Blackfire performance, so it's real easy for the core maintainers to
Yeah, that's
figure out
great.
where the problem
You
is.
can even share a Blackfire profile.
So the reason I didn't do that because I was worried that it would not be available.
Yeah, so I'm gonna.
Because I
know
don't
where it
pay
went.
for it.
So they have a feature which exists somewhere, which I can't seem to find at the moment. I'm not sure what happened to it. Anyway, if you go to a profile, oh, here we go. I don't know why it wasn't there on the other profile. On most profiles, you can just click public here.
Yeah.
And then
so will that be retained? Do you think?
That will be retained
Even at the free
indefinitely.
Really?
Yeah, at the cost of making it public. So that basically, if you want to use it for your private company data,
Okay.
then maybe not a good idea.
But
But
if
if
you-
it's for a, but that's
if
their
you
way
take
of
a Drupal clean site, there's no sensitive
Right.
stuff there.
that's their way of sort of being friendly to open source projects and such.
But yeah, this is like a godsend.
Yeah.
to have this available.
Send us your issues. We'll take a look at them and see if they're
Yeah.
see if we can come up with ideas for them.
Great. Any other like testimonials or questions? Awesome.
Great presentation.
Thanks.
Thanks so
guys.
much.
And actually, because we are excited to sort of bootstrap our performance auditing business, I'll give, depending on the scenario, I'm willing to give a couple of hours of free consulting, like in the next month, say, or two. So just write to us at Evolving Web. If you guys tried it, you're looking at a call graph, you see that there's probably something wrong, but you don't know quite how to interpret it, we'll be very happy to hop on screen share with you and just tell you if there's anything that sticks out to us. Because certainly by now we have hit our head against the wall for a week or two. So
How much of your users was non-Drupal projects? Like
Um,
PHP or something?
so
We don't have very many of those projects at the moment, but if we
But
did-
aside from our recommendations, there's nothing Drupal specific about it. It was written for Symfony,
Yeah, no, I know.
and the book covers mostly non.
Yeah. No, I've read the book for 2 months. but
Okay,
not really.
Great.
We highly recommend it. Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, guys. And hopefully I'll hear back from you. And I'll tweet the slides and I'll throw it on the page here as well.
You just hit the record button so it stops recording.